Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Home Video Library. I'm your host Nathan P. Butler, and this is the first of two episodes being recorded essentially back-to-back here in the latter part of July 2024. I was planning to do a third one because, yes, I absolutely fell down a rabbit hole with all that Power of Myth stuff that we looked at recently. There were a lot more releases of it, and sure enough, I decided to start scooping it up. But one of them had a disc arrive cracked, so I'm having to replace that. So eventually I will do an episode, probably a supplemental episode, dealing with VHS, Laserdisc, and other DVD releases of Power of Myth, but not today. Today, instead, we're going to look at something first that is kind of Star Wars adjacent, and then in our next video, we'll be taking a look at the UK release of Andor. So those who are looking for something that's very Star Wars focused, check out the next episode. Those who think things that include Star Wars, that are kind of Star Wars adjacent, as we call them in the home video community on Facebook now, just stick around for this one, because this is definitely an odd one. So, this is one that I believe I was pointed to by Matthew Hardesty. And it's an odd one in the sense that it's a documentary about collecting, but done in such a way and with such a subject matter that it really was kind of hard initially for me to get into it, but eventually I did. So it's an odd one to talk about, but I feel as though explaining my experience with watching it will help you get a sense of whether it's an interesting thing that you might want to watch, and then we can go into some more specifics about it. It's a documentary called Mad Props. Nice play on words there. Collecting nostalgia one prop at a time. Title there, different images there from different franchises and whatnot. Then the collector in question down here at the bottom. The spine here just says Mad Props, Blu-ray, product number, and then Virgil Films. And then the back has information about it, which we will read. Cast, crew information, Kino Lorber, right? Coming through Kino Lorber and Virgil Films. Then region ABC, so it is all region, and then your stats and stuff down there with legalese at the bottom, as you would expect. The description on the back says, Tom Bielchini, an avid movie prop collector, knew why he loved collecting props from his favorite films. But like any collector, everyone is different. Curious to meet and see other collectors and their collections, Tom decided to journey across the globe and find out what it was about movies that led others to seek out and own some of the greatest pieces of movie history. Yes, it is a documentary about collecting movie props, typically screen-used movie props. Inside, nothing on the case or anything, no insert, just the disc itself. This says Mad Props, Kino Lorber, Virgil Films, documentary with information, English, widescreen, 90 minutes, stereo, color, English subtitles, not rated, product number, region ABC, Blu-ray, and then legalese around the edges here. Before we dive into the actual content of the documentary, I would note there are some bonus features, but they're pretty sparse if you happen to get this Blu-ray. You have trailers for, as I took notes here, Mad Props, The Eichmann Trial, Open, What Rhymes with Reason, and Yes, I Am, the Rick Wayland, or Wayland, perhaps, story. So nothing but trailers as bonus features, only one of which is relevant to this. It's a trailer for what you're watching. But it's the story of this guy, Tom Bielchini, who is a collector of props. And if there is anything that stands out here, there were two things that initially seemed to have created a barrier between me and the subject matter when I was trying to watch this. And I feel like this is worth noting because I think other collectors, at least within the home video collecting sphere, will probably have a similar experience to what I had when watching this. And it's not a detrimental thing in the long run. You are able to get into and enjoy this documentary, but you might face those same sort of barriers that I did. So first off, this is a documentary about collecting that is by the collector himself. And at least for a little bit initially, it's the collector talking about the collecting, talking about himself and his background and whatnot. And for some, this could be seen as sort of a self-aggrandizing type of thing. Oh, here's a guy doing a documentary starring himself talking about this stuff where he is the host and a primary subject of the documentary itself. That, I think, very quickly vanishes. I think that is a feeling you might get to begin with, like, is this dude doing a documentary about himself? But very quickly, you find that this is a guy who just really loves this collecting sphere and wants to travel around speaking to other collectors about their shared experiences and just this form of collecting. You would need a documentary like this to be hosted by somebody like this. Somebody who is into that stuff, who does care about that stuff, to really have it be as positive and authentic as this turns out to be. I've seen, and we've talked on the show about documentaries done about sort of general Star Wars fans, for example, where a lot of times if they're done by someone outside the fandom community, they come off as speaking down to people, or a very negative tone or spirit sometimes to them, because the people who are doing the documentary about it don't get it. And in not getting it, they misconstrue patterns that they see with behavior. They don't understand the mindset behind what's going on, and it just makes for kind of a disjointed experience there. It has its place, certainly, that outside observer, third-party type thing. But when you're doing something about a particular collecting field, it does help to have people who are doing the documentaries be from within that collecting field. So if that puts you off to begin with, as it did me for the first few minutes, but that was it, once you started actually traveling around, don't worry about it, okay? That goes away quickly. The one thing that did kind of stick with me, though, and it's throughout most of it, is the fact that this is a very high-tier form of collecting financially. This is a guy from Tulsa who was a lawyer who became a banker. He is leaps and bounds beyond where I am, certainly, in the socioeconomic ladder, okay? And the prices for the stuff discussed in this documentary are going to be prohibitive to many of the people watching the documentary, almost to the point of being ludicrous at times. There is one item in this documentary. It is a screen-used Wilson volleyball with the Wilson face and all from the movie Castaway. The selling price this guy buys it for is approximately my and my wife's combined yearly income. That is an unfathomable thing, to me at least, to spend that much on a specific collectible. Because it's a different sort of, like I said, it's almost like a different tier or strata of collecting from a financial standpoint. Of course, these are screen-used props. They're going to be valuable. They're going to be selling for ridiculous amounts of money. But there are people out there with the financial means to actually collect a bunch of this stuff. Not I, certainly. But it's funny to put that in perspective a little bit. I mean, I think about, you know, my wife's got her income from where she works. It's an hourly pay type of thing. In my case, I have a salary. I am a teacher. I have been teaching since fall of 2002. I have a master's degree, so I'm sort of the second tier, but everything with teachers in most cases, it's almost like a grid, right? It's, here's your columns telling you what degree level you have. Here is your rows telling you how many years of experience you have. Bring them together, and that will tell you how much your base pay will be. And I take on as many extra students as possible during the school year. And for the last 10 years, I have not skipped a single summer school session and taken on the maximum number of students and leadership role as possible for extra pay during the summer as well. And even combining all that stuff together, this guy drops that on a single collectible at one point in the documentary. I can't bring my mind to even conceptualize having that level of disposable income. It boggles my mind to some degree. But I realize that to some, this collection probably has that same effect. Because I know collectors in the home video sphere, everyone from those who are like, drop in the hat, I could drop several $100s on a collectible like it's nothing, all the way down to, I'm only collecting these very specific small things, and only if I can find them on the secondary market on sale later, because even the retail price at launch is too rich for my blood. You will always find within a collecting community different levels of income. And it's not something we really usually talk about. You know, you don't usually have discussions about income levels in collecting. But you can see that even with the home video community, that there are sort of, there's a range of income levels within that home video collecting sphere. But if that's the home video collecting sphere, this is like way, you know, we're talking like all the way up to the ceiling in here type difference in level here. And I think that could be off-putting. At first for me, I was like, are you serious? This guy's spending as much as like my house before we did the repairs on this item, and then the house would sell for after repairs on this item? My God! But what I found in watching was that as much as that put almost like a 1%, 99%, or whatever you want to call it, kind of barrier between me and the subject matter, it was interesting to see as it played out that despite this being a much higher financial tier of collecting than, say, home video, there are commonalities in approaches to collecting, why people collect, how they talk about what they collect, what they care about and look for in what they collect, such that it kind of creates a kinship of collecting, even when the financial strata of that collecting is so very different. Like, I know people who would see, comparisons between home video collecting, for example, and the books and comic collecting. Heck, I did that for a long time until I sold off my massive, pretty much complete collection in order to pay for a bunch of this stuff and kind of keep this stuff growing. And I know people who collect home video and they collect the toys, for example. And these are all kind of things that have different levels of means associated with it, but not drastically different. But it's nice and interesting to see that despite the sheer difference in income necessary to really get into this, prop collecting field relative to other forms of pop culture collecting, it turns out that the mindsets are very much the same. There is a kinship, there is a bond, there is a shared experience of being a collector of this kind of stuff when you're collecting it not for, well, I'm going to collect it now so it'll be an investment that I can sell later, but getting into it for the love of what it is. So I feel like to some, maybe that level of difference between maybe where they are versus where this collecting is financially may put up enough of a barrier that it'll be not for them to watch it. But I'm telling you, as someone who initially felt that barrier, that it is worth it to see the common threads, the commonality of collecting, and the fact that this community, as collectors in general, has those levels of things that are simply part of that mindset and part of that lifestyle, I guess you could say, regardless of what you're collecting and the financial means needed to do it. So to me, it was worth a watch, but it was definitely one that at first I was like, when I started watching. In any event, we see a lot of stuff in here. He's actually showing the pod racing arch, like one of the arches of the landscape, one of the models used in Phantom Menace. Gosh, you see him talking with his kids and sharing the experience with his kids, which is pretty cool. Something that hopefully someday I'll be doing with Cade, my little guy. We see him with a Spaceballs uniform, an actual Spaceballs on-screen used uniform. All kinds of stuff, like there's an Ewok mask, I think at the prop store in London, or I think it's where he got it from, or at least where he sees it. You see scripts that were used for the filming of the original Star Wars film, a Hoth Trooper cap, lightsabers, original screen lightsabers from the prequels, Vader's gloves from A New Hope, Luke's lightsaber prop from the sequel trilogy, a First Order Stormtrooper helmet, and so on and so on. All these different things. But it's not limited to Star Wars. But Star Wars being a major sci-fi franchise, of course, that's going to be one of the many, many, many things that are shown in here. There's stuff from Aliens. As I said, there's stuff from, like, Castaway and whatnot. So it's not all sci-fi. There is stuff from Scream and all. Lots of different things that he looks at as he travels around. And he travels to, for instance, the UK, I believe. He travels to, I believe it's Italy. This is a worldwide kind of thing, though it is mostly confined to the West, the economic, political West, as it was defined. And he brings up some very interesting things, like, the choice of, do you keep something or do you sell something? Is it about growing as a collector? Do you look for deals, even at that high level, for example? Is this being done for love of the film, for love of the subject matter? What do your spouse and friends and kids think about this, and how do you introduce this to them? To what degree do you need to be careful about, especially in this particular market, legitimacy and authentication? Heck, we've seen stuff here on the show where I've run into stuff that looked legit, turns out it was a bootleg. The one that stands out to me is I don't know if I even showed it on the show, I have a DVD copy of The Force Awakens signed with certificate of authenticity from a particular group that was there during the signing, signed by Daisy Ridley. but the DVD itself is a bootleg. So they authenticated her legitimately signing a bootleg copy of the movie, which is frustrating. So where does that whole issue lie in terms of legitimacy, authentication? How do you share or display your stuff? Is it just for yourself, or is it meant to be a conversation starter and bring other people in? The idea of this as a community, a collecting community, in his case for prop collecting, in our case for home video stuff. The idea that to some degree this is a generational nostalgia type of thing, that some franchises like Star Wars will carry on generation to generation, and the props will help carry on that legacy generation to generation because they are so iconic that even though a film was made in, say, 1977, here we are in 2024 still talking about it, and so many things from that are so still instantly recognizable that having a prop of such a thing, for example, would be an instantly recognizable thing. The journey of collecting, the hunt, the chase of trying to find something that you really, really want, and the struggle to actually get it. In this case, a lot of times through auctions and having to literally compete. Closest thing a lot of us get to that is like eBay, competing in eBay auctions for it. The idea of whether props are sort of the next generation of sort of fine art, right? That these are the things that are cultural touchstones. These are the things we're collecting. The average person probably couldn't care less about having like a Picasso in their home. But to have a real prop from a movie that they love or a TV series that they love, they'd have more interest in that. And he talks about the fact that, the only real requirement for collecting is fandom. Obviously funds. He doesn't really delve too much into that. But the idea that whatever you're collecting, what it requires is just the fandom and the love of whatever it is to get into that particular type of collecting and see it as valuable to yourself. And along the way with this, he has various people who are interviewed. Mickey Rourke is interviewed at one point about the role of props and how it lifts filmmaking. He goes to one of like the major prop houses, and Lance Henriksen is there as part of the tour, for example. It's an interesting thing. It's a high-level thing, and it's not just the collector going along and talking to other collectors, because there are like big-name movie folks who are actually part of this discussion, given the fact that it is about props. But I really found it interesting, whether it was his discussion about hunting for Gray's Sports Almanac from Back to the Future 2, or the Holy Grail from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the volleyball Wilson character from Castaway, or the various Star Wars and other items, aliens and so on that he sees, and the conversations he has with all those other people. It was very interesting to find those commonalities of mindset, of love for the collecting focus, and the way the collecting and the sharing of it is approached. So, again, to some degree, I found that this was an unusual one, but it sort of puts right out there up front, this is a high-end thing, lots of money being spent, this is a collector talking about their form of collecting with others. As soon as you get past that point, you're like, okay, I accept it. That's the premise. It's a pretty interesting documentary to watch. It may not be for everyone, but he also notes that collecting may not be for everyone, which, again, is fine, just as this not being for you might be fine as well. But I found it interesting. But again, my experience with this one, it felt weird. It's rare for me to watch something and have me come off with a feeling of, this felt a little weird. I really kind of need to share why it felt weird when I'm covering it. That almost never happens with home video items that we cover here on the show. It did for this, so I did want to share that as well. So if you want to see it, it is Mad Props, released in 2024 on Blu-ray from Kino Lorber. You can find it out there now. With that, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the home video viewers, or prop collectors as the case may be.